Hello, and welcome to the Ancient Jesus Future Faith podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Tana Sheaver, and I'm here with Sarah Minardi.
Hello.
And Don Sheaver.
Hey.
And today we're going to talk about Halloween, the Christian response to Halloween, and all that fun stuff that goes with it.
And why there even needs to be a Christian
Why
response.
there even needs to be a Christian response to Halloween. Exactly. So I'm going to start with this thing that came up recently of a Texas mom warning against allowing your kids to watch Hocus Pocus 2. She says,
Let me guess, it had nothing to do with just that it's a lousy plot line.
You didn't watch it.
That's true, I didn't. Assumptions.
I mean, it's, kind of like this first movie all over again, but,
Except everyone's older.
And yeah, I actually enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Anyway, she says, worst case scenario is you unleash hell on your kids and in your home. Do not watch this film. Everyone thinks it's fake and innocent, but they could be casting any type of spell that they want to. Anything could be coming through that TV screen into your home.
Ooh.
So, thoughts?
Wow.
I
don't know. I mean, my first thought is, isn't it so often argued that in evangelical circles that you have to say the right words, but it's not about the right words, it's about where your heart is. Mm-hmm. So, to say that now words can just transmit through the TV seems like opposite to that idea.
That's the first thing. This thing happening through your TV just is a ridiculous idea. So there's that.
Yeah.
But she goes on and talks about how her family has not participated in Halloween about 4 or 5 years because the thought of exposing her kids to darkness pains her. So
Yeah, all those little Disney princesses and Ninja Turtles running around. Terrifying.
Yeah. Does she expose her kids to the crucifixion of Jesus?
That's
Because
what
to me that would be darkness as well.
A lot of people were pointing that out because the plot line is, of the movie is that they need to consume children to stay young, right? Is the witches what they're trying to do. So they're hunting children. And she was concerned. She said, it's about based on witches harvesting children for blood sacrifices.
Starting to sound like QAnon.
Sacrifices. That's what one person pointed out, that it's the same plot. Yeah. But then also somebody pointed out, they were like, so you don't want to talk about blood sacrifices? Let's talk about your religion. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think these things start off in a good place. I think these things come out of people with a desire to please God and trying to figure out what that means. But then it just goes too far.
Right.
So as funny as it is, and, I think this conversation is important. I just want to acknowledge that because I think that it's usually coming from people who are just trying to honor God, and something along the way has convinced them that this is the way to best honor God.
Yeah. So a lot of laws in rabbinic Judaism are laws for that exact reason, right? That they're guidelines or ideas meant to honor God. I think the difference between that type of thinking, and I'm with you on this, Sarah. I think it probably comes from a good place. I don't know if it came from a good place in this woman. The concept of being conscientious of what you watch and ingest, I think comes from a good place. And I think the difference is the level of arrogance at which someone posits their view. Right? Like, it's one thing for if let's say this woman was sitting at the table with the three of us and Hocus Pocus came up and she said, yeah, that's just something I really struggled with in my household because I have this fear of what's being said and what's being transmitted, and it just really concerns me, and I just find it better not to bring it into my house. I think that would feel very differently than the arrogance to say you are doing something wicked or you're causing harm to your children because you're allowing this to happen in your household. And I think I'm like I said, I'm with you on the fact that it probably comes from a good place. I'm not sure how many steps removed this woman is from that good place.
Right.
And maybe it was very much her in a very honest, genuine place, but then fear kind of overwhelmed and it became something that she then decided to broadcast in that way. But I do think that that's one of our biggest problems. And I think fear is a huge issue, right, with all of this, ironically, in Halloween, that a lot of this is built out of some kind of fear-based faith.
Yeah.
Which is really not what the text calls us to, right?
Yeah. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, is that evangelicalism is sort of swimming in fear. And that's really disappointing. Because it doesn't feel to me like good news.
Yeah.
Well, it's not good news until you accept it, right? Like it's dangerous news, and then once you accept it, then it's good news that you no longer have to be afraid. But obviously that doesn't hold true because people still live in fear.
Well, so I think this was partially on my mind because I went back to Pennsylvania this week, and there's always this very interesting transition between the Ohio Turnpike and the Pennsylvania Turnpike. First of all, Ohio Turnpike rest stops are way nicer than Pennsylvania Turnpike rest stops. Just saying. But as soon as I cross the border into Pennsylvania, all of a sudden it is much more conservative. There's way more political billboards, and I think all of the ones I passed were conservative. But then there's way, way more Jesus-y stuff. And
like signage.
So not just billboards, but yeah, there's also like signs across on the side of the road. There's also a lot of Trump stuff, like actually like mowed into hills and stuff like that on the side. And so it's very interesting. It's just like it becomes this.
If Trump is mowed into the side of a hill, does that make that a Trump hump?
There you go. That's what I will call that thing from now on when I pass it. Oh, there's the Trump hump. But there's all these, but most of the signs are very fear-based. Mm-hmm. It's very like, you will face God when you die. And are you saved? And, I guess this one maybe is not so much fear, but there's always a couple like, who do you serve? Jesus or self? And it's very
weird
threatening.
That these signs have this type of vocalness to them.
Yeah, they added that recently. you drive by and it triggers.
It updates. It triggers. I'm sure it triggers.
Like it definitely triggers me. But it all feels very threatening, like very turn or burn.
Yeah.
So then, what does this have to do with, like, how do you think that plays into the fear then of Halloween?
Well, I think it's the fear of anything that isn't overtly Christian is like, it's bad.
So, all right. So then what do we do with the fact that Christmas is almost a completely pagan holiday?
Oh, we don't talk about that.
Yeah. We don't talk about Christmas. No.
But, it's holly berries, all those things.
Halle Berry?
Halle Berry. All of those things, an evergreen tree in your home, all of those things are absolutely steeped in paganism.
But the funny thing about that is if you try to remove some of those things from places, then it's a war on Christmas.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
a war on Jesus specifically,
Right.
right? Though we call it Christmas, right?
Right.
But it is interesting to me how we have delineated some of our celebrations as being acceptable pagan contributions to our everyday life and even to our faith, and how others are in direct opposition. Now, I think that's also somewhat fair, right? Just because there are some things that are good that come from a certain group or entity doesn't mean that everything that comes from that group or entity is okay. But I definitely don't, it does not feel as though the same examination takes place around other holidays that have been greatly influenced or exclusively influenced by pagan celebrations and pagan concepts.
Yeah, they keep the Christ in Christmas, and well, he never really was there in the first place.
Right. He was in Sukkot.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also wonder why no one ever says keep the mass in Christmas. Why don't Protestants go around yelling about, evangelicals go around yelling about keeping the mass in Christmas?
Yeah. Well, and even, I mean, Halloween does have some connection to Christian roots. So the medieval Christians, well, I mean, the history of it being November 1st being All Saints' Day goes back to 610. I wrote it down. Even before that, actually, in Antioch, there was a Feast of All the Martyrs. And then Pope Boniface IV, he consecrated the Pantheon, which was a pagan temple, and then named a day to celebrate the Christian martyrs. And over time, it became also all the departed. And then over a century later, Pope Gregory III moved All Saints' Day to November 1st. But then I also found that the medieval Christians used the Eve of All Saints' Day to dress as sinister creatures, not as a way to celebrate evil, which is one of the common complaints about Halloween, but actually to mock evil and to tease it and to be like, okay, you guys get to come out for one night, but in the dawn, when the dawn comes, they know the darkness will be overcome.
That's kind of a interesting and cool way to think about that. Yeah.
So I think, we live so far removed from these things. I mean, the big overall generalization is like, it's really hard to sort out what came from what and who influenced what. But yeah, I mean, and this even goes into the idea that we can use what's in the so-called pagan world. Like, if we believe that God created the world and God's image is in man, then we can find inspiration in places that are outside of just literally the biblical canon.
Yeah.
So we can learn lessons from Aesop's fables. We can learn things from things that aren't explicitly Christian that you might label as pagan. We can still learn things from this. And I mean, I think, like you're saying that, Tana, that like it's anything that's not overtly Christian, that people are just like, we've talked about how in following the Torah, that often there would be hedges to protect from accidentally breaking the Torah. But these hedges that, if we compare it to that, these hedges are like, so it's like a whole forest and that in the end is maybe causing some harm or interfering with chances to actually share the love of God.
Right.
Because this hedge is so big and so restrictive. Or, as you were mentioning, Don, that this, what starts as like, so what I was trying to say is like, I'd like to imagine that in this woman's heart, the Hocus Pocus 2 woman, that it started in her heart as a sincere desire to figure out what God would please God for her and her family.
Right.
And then I think you were bringing up that like, well, there's also a problem when that just becomes like finger wagging and like shouting at other people.
Right.
So I think that there is a distinction to be made there because we're all walking along. Well, not all, but those of us who are trying to honor God are trying to figure out like, what is the best way that I can honor God?
Yeah.
But if you are going to be delving into something And there's so little that we can be 100% sure of. But my recommendation would be like, walk it and live it in your own life first, quietly, before you even ever like make it prescriptive for somebody else. Let's just tread carefully about making something prescriptive, because everybody's walking on their own path. And even though you feel really strongly about something, that it's not necessarily that that's for somebody else where they are right now. And I think, I'm not saying necessarily that we just like hide our light under a bushel and things like that, but I think we be careful. And I think one of the simple tools is that we try to always speak in the I. And you kind of modeled that earlier, Don, when you were saying, well, imagine she was sitting here and it was phrased like this, that we speak in the I, which means to say I, or I've been struggling, or I've been discovering, or I've been excited about this. And that we keep that focus on where we are and tread very carefully about assuming that what is for us is necessarily for everybody. Right. Because also, like, I don't know about you guys, but like, I've believed different things over the years. And I'm kind of glad that I didn't like stand up and shout from the mountaintops.
Me too.
Or, that like, the era of like social media kind of came when I was getting my master's degree, and just being able to like record things and all that like history. I'm kind of glad that I wasn't tempted by that, because I think that we need to always hold that, yes, I believe this to be true for now and I'm going to act on it, but this could also change. And I hope that our listeners, as they've listened to our podcast, have gotten a little bit of that flavor from us. And maybe we haven't said it clearly, so I'll say it now, that we're just sharing our ideas as we journey and try to stay bent toward God.
Yeah.
And we are going to get some things wrong. That's guaranteed. But the beauty of being able to ask questions and accept the fact that we're going to get things wrong, the beauty is that we have a safe place where we can talk about those things. And that's what one of the founding and like core beliefs of this podcast, I would say.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I am so glad there wasn't social media when I was a teenager.
It's interesting. I hadn't really considered the fact that there's a great book, and I was just talking about it yesterday with some folks that were over at our place, called The Words on the Move. And it talked about how it was just assumed that words would evolve and change until we wrote a dictionary. And then once a dictionary was written, it froze words and their definitions. And then people became mad when words no longer mean what they used to. And people get really upset about that, right? It's interesting to me because when you're talking about recording everything, we now do the same thing. Now we are frozen in moments in time, and people get mad if we evolve.
Yeah.
Because it's unacceptable, because what you said 20 years ago is frozen and there's evidence. And now don't get me wrong, I think that it is important that we examine public figures who are going to have power and authority, that we make sure we review their story. I think we also need to be a little bit better at giving room for growth, evolution, and change than what we necessarily have. Yeah. But it's interesting to me the way when you said that, I had never considered that, similar to words getting frozen because of writing a dictionary.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, all of us are just Polaroid moments of life that we keep track of on social media, and people will just go back through and can point to different moments and say, but that's not what you said here.
Right.
And so it's interesting.
Yeah.
I do also think you mentioned Aesop's fable. Luke 7 seems to be a quote of an Aesop's fable of the fisherman, right? So even Aesop, who was, I think, like 500 years prior to Jesus, is quoted at least once. I think people make the case it's at least twice in the text that an Aesop fable is quoted. And so these influences are not just okay, right? Like, they're beyond okay. They're actually valuable and meaningful. The problem is when we become afraid of them. You know, I think this goes into some of the debate that goes on with Paul about food sacrificed to idols, right? That he's really attempting in some ways to demonstrate that these gods have no power, right? That it's meaningless, this sacrifice, in order to demonstrate that you don't have to be scared of these idols. And so there's a way to protest against that. There's a way to function against that. I think the same thing should be true for us today as we try to navigate what we're afraid is encroaching upon our space of faith. I'd say in somewhat of an ironic twist, I feel like a lot of it is some of my own Christian brothers and sisters who are creeping into my space of faith more than the outside world. And I think it's really important. And it goes back to this idea of we have become so locked into doctrine, so locked into these are the exact beliefs that one must have to belong to this group or this denomination or this ideology, that we have, in the de facto outcome of that is there is no longer conversation.
Right.
There's no longer dialogue around ideas that push the boundaries of those groups, because out of fear that you'll find yourself on the outside. And if you've been an insider, you know how horribly those on the outside get treated by that group.
Yeah.
Right. There's two things I was thinking of that when you were talking about All Saints Day and kind of that tradition and everything. Two things come to mind with that, and kind of building on what you just said, Don, that there's an opportunity to actually have a beautiful celebration of Halloween based on, I guess a good Christian response to Halloween. If
Like your kids have to dress up as saints, or
well, I'm thinking, I mean, obviously the simplest thing, and something I'm perfectly fine with, is you just let your kids dress up and you go trick-or-treating and blah, blah, blah. But you were talking about how the people would mock evil and basically say, hey, we're going to be victorious over you tomorrow. So in a way, you could encourage your kids to dress as the most horrific thing and say, you're mocking evil. And I think there's actually something kind of cool about that by, for example.
It's like a hard candy shell on the outside with milk chocolate in the inside. You have this little 5-year-old running around.
I think you want to put it that way, especially based on where I was going. I was going to talk about Hocus Pocus again.
back to Hocus Pocus, full circle.
Where there's probably a bunch of little kids who are going to want to dress like the Sanderson sisters from that movie, right? And there would be people who would be horrified about their kid dressing up like a witch. But if they really wanted to look at it in a different way, they could say, oh, well, my cute, adorable little girl dressing up as a witch, is a way to mock that kind of thing. And the second thing,
I'd actually also argue not just mock what Hocus Pocus represented, but to mock what the Salem witch trials represented.
Yeah.
And to demonstrate that no longer afraid, that women that had their own views, go imagine that.
right.
And their own concepts of what it meant to live within this world, that they were empowered, even though the Salem witch trials tried to do the opposite.
Right. Yeah. The actual original witch hunts. And another thought about this is to view this as an opportunity to bless your neighbors and to participate in community. I think it's actually a really kind of beautiful thing that you have children coming to your neighborhood and you have the opportunity to give them treats and praise their costumes and actually maybe meet some of your neighbors that you haven't met before. But even that, so And I think sometimes we take the wrong attitude with that. And an example is in our neighborhood Facebook group. Couldn't remember what Facebook was called. Somebody posted and said, "Do we have a password for the neighborhood children this year?" And I was like, "A password for what?"
Well, because our neighborhood has pretty epic
We
trick-or-treating.
have a lot of
And
trick-or-treaters.
so I think a lot of kids come from outside of the neighborhood. So just backstory on why this would even be a conversation.
Yeah.
So,
But it's also coded language for racism potentially too.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not condone. Yeah.
No, I know you weren't. Yeah.
But
absolutely.
backstory about I think there's some neighborhoods that don't get hardly any trick-or-treaters. So
because
this
they all
would
come
be
here.
a conversation
Because
in that
they all
neighborhood.
come here. Yeah. Well, we get a lot of trick-or-treaters, and we have a lot that don't come from our neighborhood. And so there are people who will have a password for the neighborhood children to get better candy or full-size candy bars or whatever. And I just thought, wow, like, why are we concerned? And people will complain too. I'm sure you've seen it too. You're in that group. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've seen it too, where people say, "Oh, there's all these kids that come from outside the neighborhood," and they just get very upset about it. And I think you should see this as an opportunity to bless those kids. If they're in a neighborhood where there's not great trick-or-treating and they want to come here,
Yeah.
who cares?
Yeah. It's actually kind of like a good use of resources because not every neighborhood it is great for trick-or-treating.
Yeah.
So them coming here is a chance to have an experience and to have that joy and that celebration. And
Yeah.
I mean, we're coming off the Feast of Tabernacles now, which is a feast all about joy and celebrating the harvest. And I think a lot about that, like with Halloween, is that like that celebratory and that joyful spirit that sometimes gets left out of being a priority for Christian.
I think there's also the weird there's the weird group of folks that fall into a category where they're the ones complaining about this generation is, sitting around playing video games and not being outside and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden you get all of them outside and you're like, but don't come to my house.
Yeah.
Right. Like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
just really, I think in a lot of ways, there's just people that like to complain about anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That complaining is what gives them life, which is really sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So earlier I mentioned why we don't complain about the paganism that is Christmas, right?
Yeah.
So the other thing that I think is interesting, and it's not a one-to-one with Halloween, but it fits in with wizards, witches, and all that stuff, is that we'll see a rejection of something like Harry Potter, but a full embrace of Frozen or a full embrace of Lord of the Rings, right? That we have these other. Now, I'm not saying there's a lot of Christendom that will condemn Disney princesses and stuff as well, but more likely to accept a Frozen soundtrack going on in the background with a magical, basically a witch who becomes queen, and embrace that picture of an anthropomorphic snowman running around, though he is hilarious. But condemn Harry Potter. And to me, that's such a strange, like, what do you think it is that delineates in someone's mind those things?
It's interesting because
Especially Lord of the Rings versus Harry Potter, which seems to have the same darkness to it.
Well, it's interesting when you mentioned Elsa, you were like, "Oh, she's basically a witch," and I was like, "What?" But yeah, she can perform magic,
But
she does it in glitter, so
right.
She doesn't have to say a spell. Is that the thing that she doesn't say a spell? Because
know.
Harry Potter has. I'm not a Harry
But
Potter
the Wicked
person.
Witch of the West, I don't think does any spells.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fair.
Just uses a wand.
Right, but I'm saying that is that the difference between Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings? I mean, this
Oh,
is not
yeah,
my
that's
forte.
interesting.
This
Yeah.
is not my.
Wait,
do not
Forte,
get into
isn't that
either one of those.
Isn't that a magic trick, Forte? No.
I don't know.
It sounded very close to like Levioso or whatever it is.
Wingardium Leviosa.
But it just reminded me of what you said about Hocus Pocus 2, about the spells coming through the TV. And Harry Potter does have spells, right?
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings doesn't.
In the beginning.
And Elsa doesn't use a spell. So is this, I'm asking honestly, is this where like,
Trying to figure out where the difference
is this where the breakdown, and I mean, I know of the fact that people avoid Harry Potter, but I've never heard their arguments for it. So I can't really speak to that.
I wonder if any of it also has to do with the author, because wasn't J.R.R. Tolkien like good buddies with C.S. Lewis, and weren't they both like pretty overtly Christian?
I don't know.
So like that's also why Narnia is okay.
So yes to everything you said. I mean, yeah, but C.S. Lewis is, I guess I hesitate because C.S. Lewis is not a good evangelical.
No.
I love C.S. Lewis, but C.S. Lewis, I would argue, evangelicals love to quote him, but not preach him.
Yeah.
Because he had kind of a universalist mindset.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know. It is interesting though, because I think you're right. I think Lord of the Rings feels more acceptable to a lot of people than,
Yeah, I mean, then you have like the Golden Compass, the Wheel of Time. I think it's Wheel of Time.
Well, wait a minute. Isn't the Golden Compass the one that people don't like?
Yeah, because it's
Okay.
atheist, but it's basically the Lord of the Rings atheist version, which I'm not sure that you can watch. I don't know that anyone that would not have a knowledge of Tolkien's relationship with Lewis sitting at a pub, like I don't know that anybody would sit and go, I think I believe in Christianity now after watching
Right.
The Lord of the Rings. Like I don't
Right.
think anyone would walk away from that going, oh my goodness, I just had an epiphany and it is Jesus.
But it is like they're very like Jesus-y stories,
But so is Harry Potter. Right,
Like
that's my point.
Harry Potter literally is resurrected from the dead. So and saves the world from evil.
Oh
Like,
man, spoiler. I didn't know that.
Just saved you a crap ton of time.
So it's interesting because they are Christian themes.
And he also is like a bastard child.
So is the Matrix.
Harry Potter is kind of like this bastard child who is adopted in and mistreated and marginalized and all this stuff and overcomes oppression and fights for the freedom of people. It's actually more of a Christian story. I can get behind a more Christian view of Harry Potter than I probably can Lord of the Rings. Now I know that some of our listeners, not because they're super conservative
Just
perspective,
things at the
but our huge Tolkien fans are going to be like, no, do not even. I'm not saying the story is better. I'm saying that I can more easily get to Christian themes in Harry Potter, which I also don't think I've watched or read. Well, I know I didn't read the books, but I haven't watched all the movies, I'm pretty certain. But I have watched Tolkien and I have read him. That was just, I don't know. Weird flex, Don. Weird flex.
Yeah. I don't know. It is interesting. I wonder what the difference is in the minds of the people who make that difference.
And maybe if you the listener make a differentiation, let us know.
Yeah.
Like, because also I want to be careful, and I think, Sarah touches on this. We're laughing and we're stuff around the table, but we want to be very careful not to mock if someone holds a view. I think that there are right and wrong ways to handle it, and there's also right and wrong ways to critique it. So we should be careful not to critique through mocking either. But I don't personally understand how it's differentiated. Maybe it is the spell casting that is a thing, but it's also a strange delineation.
I think sometimes it's also just the label witch wizard. Like those are, like witchcraft is, that just feels more occult and more negative. Whereas,
And it's women.
and don't get me started.
Right.
And
but maybe there is something to that.
Well,
though I guess Harry Potter's a male, so
Right.
maybe.
but in Lord of the Rings, it's like, it's more, no, Gandalf's a wizard.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was going to say the elves have.
That's why I was saying at first
magical-
witches versus wizards. Like, we're okay with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, but people
because,
aren't okay with Harry Potter either. So,
yeah, that I caught myself.
Right. Interesting. I never thought about like Gandalf as a wizard. But even wizard feels different than witch, based on
Or
how
warlock.
people. Yeah, warlock feels worse than wizard. I think because usually if somebody's actually referred to as a warlock, they're usually an evil character. So, in my recollection of things.
I mean,
But I also know a ton of people who loved this show Bewitched.
Yeah.
Older people who love Bewitched, but then freak out about Halloween.
well, Samantha was a good suburban housewife.
Fair.
So what are some of the other arguments that that you guys have heard people bring up, or explanations of why they don't participate in Halloween?
I think there's also the implication or the accusation of evil amongst the people giving out the candy too.
Oh, yeah, there's always the worries about what's hidden in your candy.
Which I
and-
think, like,
yeah.
in history, I think there's really only been like 4 or 5 cases actually recorded of anything harmful being put in candy.
Have you seen all the memes going around this year of like,
Yeah.
it's like a full size kitchen knife, and it's like like a mini chocolate bar, and it's just like, you wouldn't believe what was hidden in my kid's candy. You know?
So I think there is. It's strange because I think it goes both directions, right? It's both the participating in it in dressing up, and therefore participating in celebration of what is considered to be evil by dressing up as something scary. I mean, you could just dress up as, evangelicals, and that would really scare the neighborhood.
How would you dress as do you just carry a big Bible?
I really didn't mean for it to actually be developed into anything.
Well, now I'm going to ponder.
All right, well, maybe we can get input from folks, but I think it's kind of that both direction thing, right? Whereas you're participating in evil by the way you dress, and you also are putting your children at risk of the evil of the stranger in the house that is clearly looking to, because as if forensics is not good enough to catch that person within 10 minutes of putting something in the candy that then, because you probably, as a parent, how many houses, what do you think the max number of homes you hit on one Halloween is?
Oh, I don't know. 25, 30?
Right. So, like, if your child got poisoned or found a kitchen knife in their lollipop, like, we can narrow that down to 25 or 30 houses, and I'm pretty sure catch the person pretty quickly. So it's kind of almost
It would be sort of a dumb crime.
right. So
Yeah.
and I don't want to get buried in this, but
Yeah.
but it's an exaggerated fear that really has no foundation.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of it too, like people get weirded out by the date of the 31st, like
Because
that.
it's 13 backwards.
Well, no, because I mean the supposed like.
That's what I thought.
Well, I mean, like historically, the idea that the veil between the worlds is thin and
right,
spirits
yeah.
can come over, because also like we see a lot of trunk or treats,
Yes.
and like that. I mean, they just exploded over the last decade,
That sounds
probably.
dangerous.
But like, I mean, you see them everywhere, and I don't know where it originally started from, because kids end up wearing costumes at the trunk or treat, and candy is still given out. So what problem does a trunk or treat solve, except that
You have a license number.
not being out on that particular date on the calendar? Is that the thing that kind of like spurned that, or was it bringing people to the church and
Yeah.
out of the neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think it was originally two things. One, church outreach. And so we're going to bring them to an overtly Christian atmosphere in which to do their trick-or-treating. And two, solving the fear of going to a stranger's house and having them poison your
Yeah.
candy.
Although I've seen people's trunks, and I'm not sure I would want to eat anything out of someone's trunk. I also find it interesting that I don't know, and maybe I'm wrong here. I don't spend a whole lot of time perusing church websites, but do they put like rules on what kind of costumes you can wear?
Oh,
for trunk or treats.
interesting.
I was just wondering that too. I don't think so because it's usually open to the public, but I think that I have seen in the past where churches will have a festival like and within their own like people and kind of like point out that it should not be scary costumes or things like that.
Huh.
And what constitutes scary,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if I went as the beheaded John the Baptist or the crucified Christ for Halloween.
Jeez.
First of all, showing up at a Halloween party naked and, bloodied probably is not going to be appropriate in any setting. So maybe the crucified Christ is not the way to go. But, there's so much gruesome. Maybe the tent peg through my head.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Like, no, seriously, maybe we need to take a couple minutes here and think through this. So what are some other good biblical Halloween costumes? I'm all for this now.
Oh my goodness.
I think just any of the images of God in the book of Revelation.
Yeah. Well, because of other podcasts that we're preparing for, I'm thinking about the woman who killed Abimelech and pushed the stone over the edge. So just walking around with your stones and like push the stone and kill Abimelech.
Nice. Yep. You got anything, Tana?
No.
Why? There's so many. I'm trying to think.
I mean,
Okay.
I do know people have gone as Adam and Eve, but
I'm thinking maybe a bloated body from
from
Noah's Ark.
from Noah's Ark. Yeah. What else do we got? Oh, the prophet that called the bears to maul the children for making fun of him being bald.
Oh, yeah.
We could all go as children that have been mauled by bears.
it's biblical.
It's it's not only scary, it's biblical and educational.
Oh my goodness.
So, yeah, I think the different angels and stuff that we see with like the different heads of different creatures and stuff would be awesome too.
Oh boy.
And
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, I was just, one of the things with trunk or treats and other things is I hear this like idea that, we need to redeem Halloween. And like, it always strikes me as a little bit weird, although I guess maybe I'm just being a little bit too literal or one definition of redeem. Cause I think of like redemption being like paying a price for something and like kinsman redeemer. And I immediately go there. And I think the definition is wider
Well,
than
candy's
that.
getting expensive, Sarah.
But yeah, like, I don't know. And then I just wonder, I'm like, it just gets thrown around so much. Like, are we really supposed to be like going around and redeeming things? Like, do we see that in scripture that like we are like redeeming, going around redeeming stuff?
Well, I mean, I think if it was like something that was overtly part of our faith that then was taken away from our faith and us going back and retrieving it back to our faith, we could call it redeeming. I'm not sure that Halloween fits that category.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, it is a strange mindset.
Well, I think that, that's something that Christians will say about anything that feels the least bit evil or bad. It's like, well, how can we redeem, quote unquote, this? And that's just basically like, how can we make it more Christian?
Yeah, I think that like, maybe one thing we haven't said explicitly is like, well, you mentioned the darkness, but that maybe some people avoid the holiday because of the darkness or the gore or the death, and they don't want to celebrate death. They want to celebrate life and
that feels legitimate.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're somebody who genuinely finds these things, scary or disgusting or whatever, and you just don't want to, like, I get that. I don't like horror movies, so
yeah.
but this idea that it's, and if you participate in any way by even watching a movie, that it's gonna, come into your home and corrupt you is kind of weird.
Yeah.
I have another really important thought.
Is it?
It is not. But I was thinking, what kind of candy would biblical personalities hand out? And I'm thinking Moses and his sister would hand out M&Ms. I think that, the three fellows in the furnace, Meshach, Reshach, and Radio Shack, they would hand out Red Hots.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Three Musketeers.
Oh,
that's
no. Yeah, I mean, maybe if they were in Spain.
Can Solomon hand out 100 grands?
France.
Yes. I don't care. I stand corrected. I accept your rebuke. Jesus would hand out lifesavers.
Can Sarah
But
hand out Snickers?
Nice. Nice. Well played.
Nice.
Well, Sarai can, Sarah can't.
Oh, yeah.
That's
See,
hilarious.
you can make any holiday. What would Twix be?
What would Twix? You're working the wrong direction. Tana's like, I like Twix.
I need a reason to hand out Twix or Kit Kats.
Rolo instead of YOLO.
Yep.
Although that's not entirely a Christian thing, but
Oh my goodness. Adam and Eve would hand out candied apples.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Or just apple cider. I don't know. Yeah, I think there's a lot. And listen, this is what we need from you, the
This
listener.
is an important topic.
What candies would biblical figures hand out? And I think my favorite is what Sarah suggested for Sarah, which is Snickers. And that's hilarious. Best one yet.
It made me snicker.
Boo.
Don't try to scare me. Oh my goodness. So, I'm not sure where to go from there, Don.
Well, I don't know that we have to be honest, right? I think what we need to do is I think it's important for us to be able to sit around and laugh, not just at, great puns on candy being handed out by matriarchs, but also the ability to reflect and critique our faith and critique the way that our faith has handled things, but to also do it in a way that we hold it lightly and recognize that each of us sitting around this table, each of those of you listening or watching, that we're going to change the way we think about these things. And we might become more strict in our understanding. We might become more loose in our understanding. And we should celebrate those changes constantly. And I think that when those changes come from a place of fear, we really need to take a deep breath and do very cool-headed, calm evaluation of why we're afraid and why we're making decisions out of fear. Yeah. When we know that the text says that, in God, fear can't survive, right? So what is it why are we making the decisions we make? And maybe even feel a little encouraged that it's a great time to meet your neighbors this week.
Well, and I think I would also say that we need to look at maybe not put so strong a line between this, or create an artificial line between things that are Christian and things that aren't Christian, and recognize the influence of pagan and secular things even on the Bible. And maybe if we were able to see some of those things and recognize some of them, the fear would be reduced of those pagan or secular things.
Right.
Yeah, and I would just add that when we're in conversations with people who are holding things differently than us, that this idea of turning to wonder instead of judgment and trying to have safe conversations and with people. So if you have questions, we've always talked about here that questions are welcomed, and just encouraging those questions and encouraging that curiosity, well, what has brought you to this place? And as opposed to just shaking your finger at somebody else and saying you're getting it wrong.
And to add to that, Sarah, I'd say when we ask questions, they have to be genuine.
Yeah.
If you're going to ask a question just to be smug, don't ask it.
Yeah.
Right. And, if you genuinely want to know and you are curious and you are coming from a place of wonder, to ask, how is it that you have come to this conclusion, or how is it that you have arrived at this place, can be very beautiful, but it can also be a really manipulative behavior if you aren't going to genuinely listen to the response and take it in, consider it, and hold it as their view, which is their view and valuable.
I think that's very important. What both of you just said. Both. I'm just gonna say both a whole bunch of times because I think we don't tend to have that inquisitiveness anymore when we're entering a conversation with people. And there's a lot of things that honestly about evangelicalism I just find ridiculous and I absurd. And something like this comes up with like the Hocus Pocus thing, and I just want to roll my eyes. And maybe I can do that with my friends or in the privacy of my own home or whatever. But if I were to actually have a conversation with this woman, it's not going to get me anywhere for me to just be like, are you serious? You're being an idiot, you know? And I wish we did have more conversations like that where we go, okay, well, where's your concern? Let's talk about this.
And here's the thing. If she is genuine, then that means she's living in terror.
Which is sad.
It is sad. And we should be conscientious enough to want to help.
Right.
And help alleviate wherever that terror might come from.
Because if there's concern about just from a movie, something coming through your screen,
yeah,
I mean, that seems pretty minor in the grand scheme of things. So I'm just thinking what else is amplified.
Now, if it's just clickbait to get a lot of people to look at their blog, then
sure. Right.
Then I have different opinions and feelings about this whole thing.
But
all right, send your candy recommendations. We want to hear them.
yeah. So any other final thoughts before we sign off for the day?
I don't think so.
I would say that if Sarah and Tana were handing out candies, they'd be Smarties.
Okay.
Nice.
And if Don was handing out, they'd be Dum Dums.
On that note, thanks for joining us today. If you want to find us in between episodes, you can pretty much find all our links and everything at ajffpodcast.com. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, review, rate, do all the wonderful things, share with your friends, and
It's a coffee.
buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/AJFF if you'd like to help support us and what we're doing. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
See ya.